Excellency, distinguished guests, old friends, it's such a huge honor and delight to be in this beautiful building, in this beautiful city, in this beautiful country, in this beautiful continent. Every time I get off this 13-and-a-half-hour flight from Europe, I'm always so surprised because I feel like I've landed in Europe because there's this connection. I'm one of these terrible speakers. I have 150 slides. We've got 1 hour, and I'm going to tell you everything I know about how to make a sustainable city. Now, this first picture here, I thought it would be appropriate to start with something very human and very sensual. It's tango. And the surprising thing is, this picture is not from Argentina. This is a picture from Sweden. And I'm sure you never imagined Swedish people would be dancing tango on a summer's evening. This is Malmö, which I think you could say was a suburb of Copenhagen. But if you get the atmosphere right, people do all kinds of surprising things. Now, some of you may be saying, oh, that's so cute, that's so chic in Europe. But in Latin America, we've got other issues to deal with. We've got protests, and we've got homelessness and housing problems. We've got corruption scandals. We've got people who don't believe in government. We've got violence. We've got environmental problems. We've got flooding. So many things going on, and we've got the worst obesity in the world. And if you live in Mexico, you've got an average 3 hours in your car every day. So is there time to even talk about public space and public life? Well, I would like to argue that maybe public space can be a solution to some of these big problems. In Copenhagen, we use the public space to solve the mobility problem. In New York, we've used the public space to create employment, to kickstart urban developments. In Malmö, you can see this is a place of equity where different people can meet, so we can start to solve those problems. And now in Copenhagen, this problem of flooding, which you all know about here, the infrastructure that's necessary to solve the flooding problem can also be public space. So public space can do all of those things, and that's what Gehl is really passionate about, working for those things, taking Jan Gehl's theories, which he's written books, made research, but turning this into real projects, studying human behavior, and I'll explain a little bit about that, and making real projects all over the world. And you can say, but Scandinavia is so different from Latin America. And we know cultures are different, people are different, climates are different. But when you study how people behave, people are actually very similar all over the world. There's a very basic thing. Now, I've cleared with the translators, hunter-gatherers. These were the first human beings. And these were the human beings who learned to get up on 2 legs to balance. And because they could free up 2 of their paws, they could carry things, they could make tools. And these small animals were able to conquer the planet because they could walk on 2 legs, they could throw a stone, kill a pig, and carry it home. And now I can take a mobile phone and I can drink my coffee at the same time. These clever little animals can conquer the world. The most important day in your life is when you stand up on 2 legs and take your first steps. This is my godson, 13 months old, and he was walking, hand in hand with his dad. And then suddenly one day he saw a puppy. And because of this puppy, he started walking, because he's a curious little human being, a hunter-gatherer looking for opportunities. Now he's 10 years old, so it's not puppies, it's cars. In a few years, it will be girls. And then in a few years again, it will be cars again. I don't know why that happens. But he is just a typical little hunter-gatherer exploring the world, and that's what we all are. And we use our senses. And I'd like just to spend 5 minutes explaining how human beings work. We use our senses, so we don't only see things, we smell, we touch, we hear, and our experiences are sensual, they're sensory. There is not one market in the world where they don't lift the produce up to be closer to your face so you can touch the oranges, smell the tomatoes, because they know people will buy more. Merchants understand the sensual animal. Merchants have also understood that if they make a nice facade at eye level, you'll be seduced as you walk down the street because you cannot help turning your head to look at all of this decoration. And maybe you'll find those shoes or that bag. You'll find those interesting things. Now, this is maybe one of the most famous pieces of architecture in Copenhagen by a very famous architect. And this is maybe one of the most expensive facades. It's about 80 meters of Carrara marble. But it's also the most boring street. Because, you know, I'll never find a puppy on this street. No fruit. I won't meet the love of my life on this street. And my brain tells me this in a fraction of a second. There's no point. Either I should avoid this place or walk as fast as possible. We know the places that inspire us. When we can smell the coffee, when we can hear the music, we walk slowly, we take part, we engage in the city in a completely different way. And now, I don't know if this is the Latin American influence in the Vatican. This is a couple of nuns checking out a guy on Piazza Navona. But, you know, we're human beings. We cannot help being fascinated. What's going on here? 2 nuns checking out a guy? There is nothing more interesting than human behavior. And this is why we watch telenovelas, and we watch things about people and not documentaries about sustainable cities, because people are interesting. And if we look at the behavior of people, and I'd say whether they're fishermen in Denmark, or Greek immigrants in Sweden, or on the street in India, on the beach in Brazil, even in Japan, what do you notice? They're all behaving the same way. And the first thing is, all of them are at eye level. Now, 50 centimeters, 60 centimeters, it's not much difference. But when we go down to eye level, a relationship changes completely. Because we're meeting each other in the same way. And there's a thing about distance. 3 meters is quite formal. If we go to 2 meters, 1 meter and get closer, our relationship changes. Because you have to get quite close to see the interesting things. Because if we're at eye level, and we can talk quite quietly because they won't hear us. And you see all the interesting things. You see the flash of panic in the eyes. Or you see the nice smile. All of the nice things happen in 1 meters and 2 meters. But when I go to city planning events, nobody talks about 1 meter and 2 meters. People talk about, make it 50 meters bigger, to be sure. Make it 100 meters bigger, to be sure. But to be sure of what? It won't be intimate. So we have to capture this very nice, cozy human scale. Now, human life, I said, is very exciting. Swiss people playing chess is maybe not the most exciting thing, but is better than nothing. And if you're like a lonely old Swiss man, this gives you a legitimate excuse to spend time in a public space. If there was no chess game, this would be a very creepy picture. But it's okay, they're watching the chess. They even have a legitimate excuse to start a conversation with a stranger. Oh, he's playing so badly. Yeah, I know. And in this very lonely world, these small encounters have a very big value. We also know that human beings are very happy and feel good when they have contact with nature. And so when you can hear the leaves, see and hear the water, that makes you feel better, less stressed. This is in Stockholm, where they've worked acoustically with the park space, so you hear the water and not the traffic, to calm everyone down, because we know there's a direct connection with heart disease and stress. And so we can talk about public space and health. And I guess every country now, the biggest part of the national budget is not military defense, it's healthcare. And so this is a very serious subject. And there are different ways of dealing with health and fitness. And you understand the irony of this, that you drive to the gym and then you take the escalator up, but inside there's a machine which simulates steps. You can do stepping. And there's another machine, there's a treadmill which simulates walking. And there's even spinning which simulates cycling. And people pay money to do this. You know, they can do it for free outside. But of course, people care about their health. And you can ask a nurse or a surgeon, what's the foundation of public health? And they'll say more or less the same thing. They'll say fresh air, exercise, meet people. Fresh air, because even if you're in the middle of Sao Paulo or in New York, the air outside is always better than the air inside. Exercise, you don't have to run a marathon, you don't have to play basketball, but just move your body. And for psychological health, because human beings were social animals, to be together with other people. Now, Mexico, 103 years ago, when they had the centenary, almost every Mexican city invested in public space. You can go to any Mexican city and you'll be the Plaza Centenario or something. And 103 years later, those are the most popular places filled with life. For Mexico's 200th birthday, they built a double-decker highway. And I ask the question, in 100 years' time, which will be seen as the best investment? Because I don't believe in the future this will really give so much to the Mexican people as those public spaces. So we know how to make good spaces for people. We know those are the places we go to on holiday. When we go to Stockholm and we have the most expensive cup of coffee we have in our life. When we go to Cartagena and walk in these intimate, cozy streets, which is really a sensual experience. Or, what does it they say? See Venice and die. You know, and you can go to Venice and have the most expensive pizza in your life. And you know, why do people go to Venice? You know, the people aren't nice. It's very expensive. But people go to Venice because it's a fantastic, sensual, social experience. The streets are very narrow, so you have this contact. You're so close. You can smell the perfume of the women. You know, you can hear the conversation. You can see the water. And when we have all of these nice, sensual experiences at the same time, our brain goes, yes, this is how it should be. This makes me happy. So can we make cities that are more like Cartagena, more like Venice? Can cities change? Story number 2, Copenhagen. In the 1960s, Copenhagen, like everywhere else, was a car city. And policy was all about making space for cars. This was the main street in Copenhagen. And then they had this really crazy idea. Let's make the first pedestrian street in the north of Europe. And of course, everybody knew it would never work because the Danes are Lutheran people. They don't have a culture of hanging out and walking and promenading. And you know, the weather in Denmark is so bad. And of course, all of the shops would go bankrupt, you know, if cars couldn't stop right outside. But what happened? People in Denmark discovered they were actually a little bit Latino. Because it was very nice to walk slowly and smell the sausages, have a coffee, let the kids run around, relax. And you can see here, even on a winter's day, the pedestrian street is still filled with people because it's nice. It's nice to be a human being just walking in this space. And in a way, this is the beginning of the work of Gehl and Gehl Architects, was following this process of change in Copenhagen, advising the city how to make this journey to be more like a city for people. This is New Haven, the port. And as you can see, in the 1980s, it was a fantastic place to park your car. 60 parking spaces. And they had this, well, maybe we could make something for people here. Come on, 60 parking spaces, that's valuable. But what we got was 600 parking spaces for people. Now, who buys more ice cream? Who drinks more beers? 60 parked cars or 600 people? And so the shopkeepers very quickly started to understand that, maybe this is something. On a really nice evening, there can be 1,000 people in this space. And what's nice is underneath the white umbrellas, you've got the rich Latino tourists drinking Chardonnay. But the poor local people, the poor Danes, they sit on the edge with their 6-pack of beer. But what's important is that the different people share the same space. There's commercial activity, there's free activity, and everybody's in the same sunset, the same water, listening to the same music. Another way of making the city a little bit more gentle, this is a sidewalk which continues across the side street, so that when the car comes, the car has to cross the sidewalk as a guest. A small detail, but just saying the pedestrians are important. Or how about this? The sunny side of the street, not just being a place to walk, but a place to spend time, even a place to play. Even adults could play in the street. Now, as you know, the weather in Denmark is not perfect. It can be cold and it can be dark, but the Danes have learned to live outside. And there's maybe something about living with the weather you've got. We know because we've got lots and lots of research about how public space is used, and we know exactly how many chairs and tables are in the public space at any one time. And over the last 25 years, we've seen the season grow month by month every year. And in the beginning, this tables and chair thing, that was only in the month of July, because that was perceived as being the summer. But, if you go to Denmark in July, you'll find the weather isn't always that great. And if this could be a July day in Denmark. But if you can sit outside on a shitty day in July, you can sit outside on a shitty day in May or April or October. And now the season for sitting outside in Denmark, instead of being July, it's gone from March till Christmas. Because even when it's cold, you can take a blanket, you can have a hot wine, and it's very nice to be outside being a human being in public space. And in the summer, you can do all kinds of amazing things, because if you clean up the harbor, you can have a beach, you can have a resort in the middle of the city. And that's cool, but what's great is that this means people who can't afford to go on holiday to Spain or to the south of France, they can get their swimming costume on, and in the middle of the city, they can have their holiday. And, and actually, this is a very good equalizer. If you want to talk about equity, meeting somebody in a public space in your swimming costume is a very good way of just saying that we're actually all the same. And on the serious side of the weather, just like in Buenos Aires, Copenhagen has got really serious flooding problems. And so much so that they have to reinvest in new infrastructure. But rather than burying this flood infrastructure under the ground, You can use this as an opportunity to make new public space, and public space which adapts with the weather. So when you have to make this investment anyway, you can use it to make something really nice that people can enjoy. Okay, public space, walking, staying. The other thing you've heard about is cycling, and we've heard even the Crown Prince cycles. But what I think is more important, if we look down here, is not only the Crown Prince of Denmark cycles, but the grandmother cycles, the 8-year-old kid cycles, the mom, and actually it's most important to convince the mother, because if the mother's not convinced, nobody will cycle. So making a system where everybody feels comfortable cycling, and cycling everywhere, and I'm too far away. A very, very simple system. You've heard about Scandinavian design, the simple lines of Scandinavian design. This is the simple design of the Scandinavian cycle track. 2 curbs, sidewalk, bike track, curb, parked cars, driving lane, and you always cycle in the same direction. It's very, very, very simple. Everybody knows where they're going to be. The pedestrians don't get angry with the cyclists because they know exactly where they're supposed to be. The cyclists don't get hit by the car doors, so it's safe. And if you can imagine, if you're cycling and you've only got cars on one side, it's much easier than if there are things on 2 sides. It's a very, very simple system, but that means that suddenly so many more people can feel comfortable and safe cycling. And when you can feel comfortable cycling, you can start engaging with the surroundings. You can see the shops, you can see the people, you can enjoy the city in a different way. So it's a different way of cycling. So it's not racing, and wearing funny elastic clothes. It's cycling like a grandmother in the city, looking around and enjoying being a human being. Thank you. And a cycling system is composed of 2 parts. One part is what you'd call hardware, which is all of those things like bike tracks and traffic lights and all of the infrastructure that makes the system work. But what's important, in Copenhagen, they've also invested in software, the cultural change. And this is things like safety campaigns, cycle to work campaigns, teaching immigrant women how to cycle. This is just a small detail, but having female teachers to teach these women. This woman will never get a car. She'll never get a driver's license. But if she gets to ride a bicycle, she can visit her sister on the other side of the city. Maybe she can get a part-time job because she has this liberty of having access to communication. So small things, investment in software, just as important as the investment in hardware. And maybe the cutest thing of everything, when you're 7 years old in Denmark, you can take your bike driver's license. And this is out on the street with the police. And actually, I think if you're a policeman in Denmark, this is the nicest job you can have, is doing the 7-year-old driving license. And this is so that children can start school and they can cycle to school. And really fantastic research from last year, we now know that children that walk and cycle to school, they perform better academically than children that are driven to school. And this has been researched very thoroughly. And this is the big crisis for the middle class. Because if you drive your kids to school, you're a bad parent. And actually, it's common sense. If you arrive at school, kind of like you've stimulated, awake, you've seen all these impressions, you've had the wind in your hair, you're going to arrive at school ready to learn. But if you're kind of in the back of the car, like, shut up, I'm driving, shh, you're going to arrive at school like this. You're not going to be ready to learn. So, there's always a bigger picture. And more than 40% of people cycle to work every day, which which is incredible, 40% every day in Copenhagen. And even in the winter, 70% continue to cycle. And why do they do this? Because it's convenient. Because it's the easiest way to get around. Oh, it's so cold. But you know, it's not for poor people. This is the Louis Vuitton shop in Copenhagen. And what's in the window? A bicycle. So it's become something which has touched everybody's lives. But all of these things, all of these aspects are all about improving everyday life. You can do big fancy projects. You can build an opera house. You can build a big cultural center. But by making these small investments, we can improve people's everyday lives. Because how many times a day do you cross the street? How many times a day, do you sit down on the bench? Doing these cheap things that make everybody's life better. But can we export this? Can we take this Nordic, Danish experience to other places? Well, we've tried. The first country we went to was Australia. We went to Melbourne, and Melbourne was interested in improving the whole human experience thing about life in the street, the experience of walking, spending time in the city. And so Melbourne did the Copenhagen course. Now, there's a word some people say, they talk about Copenhagenize. And I have to say that we don't like this word, because we don't believe that it's our job to Copenhagenize another place. We want to make Melbourne to be a better Melbourne. You can take the experience from Copenhagen and Denmark, but we have to reinterpret it so it fits to your place. So we have, on the homepage of the city of Melbourne, Copenhagen-style bike lanes. So what is Copenhagen style? Okay, can you see the difference? Okay, first thing, it's the British Empire. We're on the left. Next thing, you can see the curb. The curb is 15 centimeters. The curb in Copenhagen is 8 centimeters. And this is something to do with this kind of Crocodile Dundee driving style that they have in Australia. 8 centimeters is not a curb. You can also see there's this wider separation, opening the car door. And then you can see that this dividing thing has been broken up. And this is because this is a cheap system, so the rainwater can run through. So they've just adapted the existing street. So otherwise, it's the same concept as Copenhagen. One direction, the direction of transport, no collisions. But it's been reinterpreted for the local situation. And I think that's the way we want to work. Another example of how you change the perception of public space. Melbourne was filled with these little back alleys, these laneways, where the places where the air conditioning was, the dumpsters, and not very nice places. But by making a software change, by changing the regulations for land use, it was possible to have new functions. And in the Australian climate, these narrow streets were actually quite cozy, a bit like Venice, maybe. And if you live in Melbourne, you cannot go to Venice for the weekend. And if you can have that kind of experience locally, that's fantastic. But you can see in 1983, there were 2 outdoor cafes in Melbourne. And how that culture has changed. And of course, this is not just about people enjoying themselves outside. This is about creating thousands and thousands of jobs, and bringing people out into the public space. And how do they solve their security problems in Melbourne? They used to have police cars parked everywhere in the center. Because people would come out of the bars and they'd have fights. Again, it's the Crocodile Dundee thing. What they discovered was open kiosks, serving coffee, selling books, selling flowers. This is a kiosk which has been built by the city. Very cheap rent with only 2 rules. It must be open until midnight every night, and on the weekend 24 hours. And in this way, the flower man becomes the policeman. And it's a completely different feel. If you're walking down the street and you see a police car, you feel, this is a dangerous place. But if you see a flower stand, you feel, this is quite nice. This is a friendly place. I could spend time here. And Melbourne, #1 in the world as a livable city. Can we get harder places? What about New York? Could we take this to New York? This was Times Square 7 years ago. The most famous square in the world. Actually not so impressive looking. And we discovered that 90% of Times Square was car space. But 90% of the people who used Times Square were pedestrians. And they told us, you can't change that because this is car culture. 56,000, car users on Flushing Main Street, 56,000 voters. So the mayor got very nervous because 56,000 voters. But we discovered the number of pedestrians was a bigger number. And by using this data, we can create a debate to talk about how we use the city. 30% of the population of New York is children and seniors. But in any public space we looked at, it was only 10%. So 20% of the population was missing. And of course, would you let your grandmother cross the street in New York? But now, the children can't vote, but they have parents who vote. The old people vote ferociously. So for Mayor Bloomberg, there was kind of an opportunity to be re-elected, because if he could improve the life for more people, this becomes politics. So you can change the mood, you can have an event. This is something that's stolen from Latin America, the Ciclovia, closing Fifth Avenue for a Saturday, giving people a taste of what it could be like. Were you in the city on the weekend? We were cycling in Manhattan, we heard birds singing, we had this amazing experience. You can give people a taste of it. But if you're the mayor, you need action. And the big problem, if you're a politician, is you have 4 years to deliver change. Now, any of you who have worked in the city, you'll know if you want to get planning permission, that takes 6 years. If you want to do a project, you need to do an environmental impact statement, which takes 7 years. The traffic model can take 10 years. And that means for the mayor, it's impossible to do anything, because the big risk is the next mayor will cut the ribbon on your project. So we invented the pilot project, and to go and make change using paint. And only with paint, we could turn a place from this to this in just 48 hours. And don't panic. This is just a pilot project, it's a test. So no planning permission, no environmental impact statement, no traffic model. This is the traffic model. We're testing it, and if you don't like it, we'll take it away. But of course, you can see that if you do it that fast, well, actually, it's quite easy. And what amazed us was in New York, which is maybe the most sophisticated city in the world, we could trick the New Yorkers with paint to believe that they had cycle lanes and public space. And they used them. And some people said, you cannot impose European culture on the United States. We don't sit outside in New York because we don't like sitting outside. This is an elitist project. And I can tell you that these guys did not go to school in Europe. They don't have a college degree. But anybody knows how to sit on a chair. Anyone can do this. And this is very, very accessible. And the back lady, she's still there. Those maybe undesirable people, they're still there. But we've normalized the public space. Now there are women and men and families. We've normalized public space. And we've created jobs. We've inspired investment. And what was amazing was these cheap painted projects, big private companies came in and wanted to sponsor. They built the Marimekko, built their flagship store. They invested millions of dollars. next to a painted public space. So with this acupuncture, we could also provoke spending from the private sector. And if you ask New Yorkers, we know it's all good news. We see good results. And what's amazing is, I guess, New York has the most expensive real estate in the world. And for free, we got 35,000 square meters of public space, which the city already owned, but we transferred the use and gave people this public space. And Times Square has gone from this to this. But it's a pilot project. It's only paint. So do you want to go back? No. Nobody wants to go back because this is American culture. This is freedom. This is how we do things in the States. And as Frank Sinatra says, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And it's really about making better everyday life. And it's, these kids, they used to go in their father's Jeep to baseball practice. Now they cycle. These children will grow up to be different people because of this experience. And all of this is about taking people on a journey. Traditionally, planning has been a bit elitist. It's been distant. Most people don't understand. It's about making reports and sending reports. We need to make this planning process more accessible, more inclusive. We need to make it possible for Mr. Trash Can to speak to Mrs. Lighting, to speak to Mr. Maintenance. We need to get everybody around the table together. And it's very hard to listen to everybody at the same time. So we need to develop methods so we can harvest the knowledge that everybody has, because we all know different things. And we need to harvest that knowledge and work together and find methods to plan co-creatively. So we need more dynamic processes to do that. And then we need to test things. Now, in San Francisco, our colleagues invented this amazing parking day. So for one day, you can get a taste of what change could be like. And maybe you could make it a little bit more official, and these parklets become semi-permanent. You can do this in San Francisco, and we know those are the cool, hip people. But there are hipsters in Chile as well. This is in Valdivia. This is also showing you can do this anywhere. You can change the balance of how the street is used. Mar del Plata. Those are the heroes of Latin America. They've done all of those things. Ola, he's hidden up here. One Scandinavian, 30 Argentines, see what you can do. A method of working together, listening to each other, to make a good plan together. And just like New York, going out, creating the public space, just paint, and the minute the paint's dry, people know how to use the space. So we can deliver change fast and give people a taste of what their city could be like. Now, maybe our biggest challenge was after the earthquake in New Zealand, in Christchurch. We went in and we were given the task to redesign the city in 3 months. And the only way we could do this was with the citizens. So we created a very big dynamic dialogue, and we collected ideas, and we got 106,000 ideas. Now, many of you who work with cities must be terrified by the idea of asking people what they want. Maybe they'll ask for things that you cannot give them. But I can say that 97% of the people in Christchurch, they asked for very sensible things. People are smart. People know what they need. And if you listen to them, you can create a way of working so you can design the city. And this is from the documentation of the real people, the citizens of Christchurch, describing the city they wanted. And when, after 3 months, the plan was published, the very conservative newspaper who really wanted to dismiss the project had to admit that the plan was great, because this plan did not belong to the politicians. It didn't belong to some experts from abroad. This plan belonged to the people of Christchurch and the 106,000 ideas that they made. Now, it's hard to build a city. It takes time. So you can start with containers. You can give people a taste of the city that they're going to get. And if we go all the way back to the beginning, we can do the most sensual human thing there is. You can start dancing. This is a little pilot project in Christchurch, a danceomat. You can plug in your iPhone with your music, and for 15 minutes, you get the loudspeakers, and you can have this very nice, sensual experience in a public space and imagine what life in the future will be like. So we've gone full circle from Malmö to the other side of the world and enjoying being a human being. Now, maybe I've got a couple of minutes left. When I came here, it's really been a big honor for me to be here serving the Queen of Denmark. And it's a very great honor that the Danish embassy has supported us together with the bank, the city, and the nation of Argentina for this project. But I have to confess, I'm not Danish. And it was very important when I came here. I'm Scottish. And my mom said, no, you're going to Argentina. Remember, we're not British, we're Scottish. And I have to tell you about, if you're Scottish, the word Argentina only means one thing. 1978, World Cup, the year that England did not qualify. And Scotland went alone to Argentina. This was, this great, great time for us. There was, of course, the virtual victory in that first match with Holland. We went crazy. And the post office in the UK were so excited by this possibility that Scotland might win, they actually made a stamp, which is now hidden deep in the archives of the post office. But of course, as you know, Scotland didn't win the World Cup. And actually, Scotland hasn't been in the World Cup for a long time. And why is this? Well, when I was a kid, everybody played football on the street. Outside, everybody, boys, girls, and what happens in a country, if everybody's playing football on the street, eventually some of those kids will go to a football club. Some of them will, start playing, in a semi-professional team, and eventually you can find 11 players who are good enough to compete internationally. Sadly, in Scotland, all the kids are inside playing with computers. Their parents tell them it's too dangerous to be outside. And so I'm always very relieved when I come to Argentina, and I still find that there are children who are playing outside. Because playing outside, kicking a ball about, and actually even in Germany, there's hope. They've still got a national team, and this is the connection. It starts out here. So many big things start with very small steps. These big questions about climate change, about democracy, about equity, about employment, all of these big questions seem impossible challenges. But with small steps, and by improving the space outside our front door, we can start to make a difference. Thank you very much for listening.